The station called Axiom Prime was the largest structure ever built by any living species in the known galaxy, and it floated in the dead center of a pale blue nebula, like a silver seed waiting to grow into something terrible. It was here that every new species came to be judged. The Galactic Concord had ruled the stars for 11,000 years, and in all that time they had developed a system they believed was perfect. A way to look at a species and decide exactly what it was and what it would ever be. They called it the classification system. Every species that made first contact was examined, measured, tested, and then stamped with a single word that would define its entire future among the stars: predator, militant, hive, scavenger, or peaceful. That word determined everything: what territories a species could hold, what weapons it could build, what trade routes it could access, and how much freedom it would be given to grow. Worked for thousands of years, and no one in the Concord questioned it, because no one had ever needed to. Until the humans arrived. The delegation from Earth came aboard Axiom Prime on a cold Tuesday morning by their own calendar, and they came smiling. There were 12 of them, led by a tall woman with dark skin and calm brown eyes, named Captain Ilara Mwangi, and she walked through the grand halls of the station as though she had been born there. The other species watched from balconies and observation decks as the humans passed below, small, soft creatures with no claws, no venom, no armor plating, no electromagnetic organs, no hive link, and no natural weapons of any kind. A Drexari warrior, 7 feet of scaled muscle and bone-plated fury, leaned over a railing and let out a low rumble of amusement as the humans walked beneath him. "These are the new ones?" he asked his companion. "Apparently," his companion replied. "They come from a death world. But look at them. They are made of water and hope and nothing else." The Drexari laughed, and the sound echoed through the corridor like stones falling down a well. Lifeform, who had personally classified over 900 species and had never once been proven wrong. Looked down at the 12 humans standing in the center of the chamber, and Rindal spoke first. "You are the species called human, from the world called Earth, in the system you call Sol," he said, and his voice was like gravel being poured into a metal drum. "We have reviewed the data packet you submitted, and we will now ask our questions." Captain Mwangi stepped forward and bowed her head slightly. "We are honored to stand before this tribunal, and we are ready to answer whatever you wish to know." The tribunal asked about human biology, and the humans explained. They were omnivores but not apex predators, their senses were average at best, their bodies healed slowly, and their natural lifespan was barely a century. The tribunal asked about human society, and the humans showed them images and recordings, art galleries, and concert halls, hospitals, and schools, farmers feeding the hungry, volunteers rebuilding after storms, scientists reaching for the stars not to conquer, but to understand. They showed them the United Nations, a body where hundreds of nations came together to talk instead of fight. They showed them disaster relief missions, where humans crossed oceans to help strangers they had never met. They showed them children laughing in parks, and old people holding hands on park benches. They did not show them the wars. They did not show them the trenches of Verdun, or the ruins of Hiroshima, or the burning oil fields of the Middle East, or the long, bloody centuries of conquest and empire and genocide that had shaped their species into what it truly was. When the data packet had mentioned historical conflicts, the human diplomats had framed them carefully. Internal disagreements, they said, long since resolved. The growing pains of a young civilization finding its way toward unity. Tribunal believed them, because why would they not? The system had worked for 11,000 years, and these small soft creatures fit so neatly into the category that was waiting for them. Rindal the Keeper looked at the data, looked at the humans, and made his judgment with the confidence of someone who had never been wrong. "Classification rendered," he announced, and his voice filled the chamber. Species human. Classification peaceful. Subtype cooperative curious. A murmur passed through the observation galleries above, and most of it was dismissive, because peaceful was the lowest classification a species could receive. It meant limited territory, restricted military development, and a position near the bottom of the galactic hierarchy. The humans were granted 3 uninhabited star systems in a quiet corner of the Orion Arm, basic trade licenses, and a firm reminder that peaceful species were expected to remain exactly that. Accepted the judgment with grace, thanking the tribunal warmly, shaking hands and tendrils and appendages with every diplomat who approached her, smiling that calm, steady smile that never quite reached her eyes. Later that evening, alone in her quarters aboard the human transport vessel, she sat down at a secure terminal and typed a message in a code that no alien cryptographer would ever break, because it was not based on mathematics. It was based on a dead Earth language that only 12 people in the universe still spoke. The message was short. They bought it. Begin Phase 2. She sent it, closed the terminal, and leaned back in her chair, looking out the viewport at the vast glittering sprawl of Axiom Prime. Somewhere out there, 4,000 species were going about their lives, confident in their system, certain that they understood the universe and everything in it. They had looked at humanity and seen something small and soft and harmless. They had no idea what they had just invited through the door. And, by the time they figured it out, it would already be far too late. 30 years passed, and the galaxy did not notice what was happening, because the galaxy was not paying attention to a peaceful species in a quiet corner of the Orion Arm. That was the first mistake. The humans had been given 3 star systems, barren, unremarkable, and so far from the major trade lanes that most species would have considered the assignment an insult. But the humans did not complain, and they did not protest, and they did not make noise. They simply got to work. Within the first decade, human corporations began appearing at galactic trade auctions. Small, polite, well-dressed representatives who bid on territory that nobody else wanted. Gas giants with crushing atmospheres, asteroid belts full of jagged rock, frozen moons orbiting dead stars, worlds choked with methane and carbon dioxide, where nothing could live and nothing could grow. The other species watched and laughed. A Renari trade broker named Zelith Vor processed one such sale, a cluster of 6 dead worlds in a system so far from anything useful that the previous owners had abandoned it 3 centuries ago. And he stamped the paperwork with a feeling of mild confusion. "Why do the humans want these places?" he asked his supervisor. His supervisor, a large Renari with cracked chitin and tired eyes, waved a forelimb dismissively. "Who cares? They are peaceful, they are harmless, and they are paying above market price for garbage. Let them have their rocks." Zelith Vor filed the paperwork, but something stayed with him, a small itch at the back of his mind that would not go away. The humans kept buying. Within 20 years, they owned 14 star systems, and still nobody was alarmed, because every single acquisition had been done through perfectly legal channels, purchased, traded, or claimed from unclaimed space, all within the rights granted to a peaceful species under Concord law. Species could conquer territory, but faced heavy trade restrictions. Peaceful species could not conquer, but could trade freely. It was a system designed to keep the violent species contained and the gentle species comfortable. Nobody had ever considered that a species might choose the peaceful path, not because it was gentle, but because it was smarter. The real shock came when the galaxy finally looked at what the humans had done with their worthless rocks. They had transformed them. The methane world of Kepler 7741b, purchased for a fraction of a galactic credit, was now a garden planet. Its atmosphere cracked open and rebuilt molecule by molecule, its surface seeded with engineered biomes, its oceans filled with water pulled from comets that human ships had redirected with a precision that bordered on art. The frozen moon of Hestia, once a ball of ice orbiting a dead star, now had cities on it, gleaming structures built into the ice itself, powered by geothermal taps that reached down to the moon's warm core, home to 3 million humans who lived and worked and raised children in a place that had been lifeless stone 30 years before. The asteroid belts that the Rinari broker had laughed about were now shipyards, vast industrial complexes hidden among the rocks, building things that nobody was looking at closely enough to question. Because why would anyone look closely at a peaceful species? The terraforming was impressive enough, but it was not the most dangerous thing the humans were doing. The most dangerous thing was the music, and the food, and the films, and the games, and the fashion, and the stories. Human cultural exports began flooding the galactic market in the second decade after classification, and they spread like a virus through a body that had no immune system. A Vorthani merchant heard a human song called Bohemian Rhapsody, and wept for 3 days because his heart could not hold the emotion. Species had never conceived of anything so emotionally complex. A Drexhari warrior watched a human film about a small hobbit carrying a ring across a dangerous land, and found himself moved in ways that his species' entire artistic tradition had never managed. Human cuisine, strange, chaotic, impossibly varied, became the most sought-after luxury in 12 sectors, and restaurants serving Earth food began appearing on stations and worlds that had never seen a human face. The galaxy was falling in love with humanity, and it did not understand that love was a chain. Trade dependencies formed like roots growing through stone, slowly, invisibly, and with a strength that would only become clear when someone tried to pull them out. Species that had once been self-sufficient now imported human entertainment, human medicine, human technology, and human food, and their economies quietly shifted to accommodate the flow of goods. And year by year, they became a little more like humans, more dependent and a little less free. Zelith Vor noticed. He had been promoted to archivist, a senior position in the Concord's vast bureaucracy, and he had not stopped watching the humans since that first strange land purchase. He spent his evenings in his quarters, surrounded by data screens, mapping human expansion with colored lines that spread across the star charts like blood vessels growing through living tissue. He tracked the trade deals and the cultural exports and the aid missions, always the aid missions, because every time a human relief ship arrived at a struggling colony world with free medicine and free food and free smiles, a trade agreement followed within the year. He compiled his findings into a formal report and submitted a request to the Tribunal of Assessment for a reclassification hearing. The request was denied. The denial came with a short note. Species 4217, human, was classified by Rindal the Keeper personally. Classification stands. No further review is warranted. Zelith Vor stared at the note for a long time. Then he opened a new file on his personal terminal and began writing a book that he already knew nobody would read until it was too late. He titled it The Smiling Invasion, and he wrote the first line with the grim certainty of someone watching a fire spread toward a city while everyone around him argued about the weather. Meanwhile, on a terraformed world in the outer systems, a human engineer named David Chen stood on a hillside overlooking a valley that had been bare rock 5 years ago and was now filled with golden wheat swaying in a manufactured breeze. His communicator buzzed, and he answered it. Phase 2 is on schedule, he reported to someone far away. The shipyards in Belt Sigma are producing at full capacity. The cultural integration metrics are exceeding projections across all target sectors, and the Concorde still has us filed. There was a pause, and then a voice on the other end, calm, measured, familiar, said, "Good. Keep smiling, David. Keep smiling until I tell you to stop." David Chen looked out over the wheat field and the blue sky that his species had built from nothing on a dead world that the galaxy had thrown away like trash, and he smiled. Not because he was happy, but because he had been told to. The Drexhari Dominion had conquered 40 star systems through blood and fire and the cracking of bones, and they had never once lost a war against a species classified below them. So when the War Council of the Dominion looked at the map and saw human territory spreading like a stain across the sectors that bordered their own space, they did not feel fear. They felt annoyance. "They are peaceful," said war leader Kreth Voss, a scarred giant with one blind eye and teeth that had been filed to points in the old tradition. "They have no fleet, no army, no warrior caste. They have farmers and musicians and merchants who sell food that makes you cry." The other council members rumbled in agreement. "We hit one of their border colonies," Kreth continued. "Something small, a raid, not an invasion. Enough to remind them where they stand, and enough to make the Concord look the other way, because it is just a minor incident on the frontier." Map. And his claw landed on a world designated Haven 528, a recently terraformed colony on the edge of human space. Population 200,000. No strategic value, no major infrastructure. A soft target. The perfect message. The Drexhari assembled a raiding fleet of 200 warships, cruisers, destroyers, and assault carriers loaded with ground troops who had spent their entire lives training for exactly this kind of operation. It was, by Drexhari standards, a modest force. More than enough for a peaceful species. They jumped into the Haven 528 system on a Wednesday, and by Thursday, the galaxy had changed forever. The fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel in standard attack formation, weapons hot, shields raised, ready to overwhelm whatever token defense the humans might have scraped together. What they found instead was a wall of steel. 312 human warships were waiting for them, arranged in a defensive formation so precise that it looked like it had been planned for months, because it had been. The Drexhari fleet commander, a veteran of 6 wars, stared at his sensor screens and felt something he had never felt before in his life. Doubt. "Where did these come from?" he demanded. Nobody answered, because nobody knew. The ships were not converted freighters or hastily armed civilian vessels. They were purpose-built warships, bristling with weapon systems that the Concord had no record of, running power signatures that did not match anything in the Galactic database. And they opened fire before the Drexhari could even finish their scans. The battle lasted 9 hours, and it was not a battle, it was a lesson. The humans did not fight like a peaceful species, and they did not fight like a militant species either. And that was what made it so terrifying. They fought like something entirely new. Their ships moved in coordinated patterns that shifted and adapted in real time, responding to Drexhari tactics with countermeasures that seemed to have been designed specifically for this enemy. Because they had been. Their weapons targeted critical systems with surgical precision. Engines first, then weapons, then shields, then life support. Disabling rather than destroying when possible, killing only when necessary, as though even in the middle of a war, they were thinking about what came after. Their ground forces, deployed to defend the colony itself when Drexhari dropships made it through the orbital battle, were worse. The Drexhari warriors were bigger, stronger, faster, tougher, and more experienced than any human soldier, and none of it mattered. The humans used the terrain like a weapon, collapsing tunnels, flooding corridors, creating kill zones that funneled the Drexhari into overlapping fields of fire. They used psychological operations, broadcasting distorted sounds and false signals. That made the Drexhari think they were surrounded when they were not, and safe when they were not. They used drones and automated systems, and battlefield AI that learned and adapted faster than any living commander could. and they fought with a ferocity that shocked the Drexhari to their core. Because these soft, small creatures with no claws and no armor and no venom threw themselves into combat with a willingness to die that no rational species would consider acceptable. A Drexhari sergeant, pinned behind rubble in the streets of a human city, watched a human soldier charge a fortified position with nothing but a rifle and a grenade, taking 3 plasma bolts to the chest before detonating the grenade and killing everyone inside. And the sergeant whispered a word in his own language that had no direct translation, but meant something close to, "What are these things?" 9 hours after the first shot was fired, the Drexhari fleet was broken. 162 of their 200 ships were destroyed or disabled. Their ground forces were shattered, and the survivors were retreating in disorder toward the system's edge. The humans let them go. That was the part that scared the galaxy the most. Not the violence, but the control. The fact that the humans could have chased down every last ship and chose not to. As though they wanted survivors. As though they wanted witnesses. Helmet camera footage from the battle leaked onto the Galactic extranet within hours, and it spread faster than any human cultural export ever had. The galaxy watched, and the galaxy went quiet. The Concord Assembly convened an emergency session, and the chamber was full for the first time in decades, and every species was talking at once. Where did they get those ships? How long have they had a military? They are classified peaceful. This should not be possible. Fleet Admiral Ilara Mwangi, she had been promoted many times in 30 years, appeared before the assembly via holographic projection, and she was calm, and she was composed, and she was smiling that same smile she had worn the day she first walked into Axiom Prime. "We were attacked without provocation by the Drexhari Dominion," she said, and her voice was steady and clear. "We defended our people and our territory, as is our right under Article 7 of the Concord Charter, which grants self-defense rights to all member species regardless of classification." She paused and looked around the chamber. "We are peaceful," she said. "We have always been peaceful, but peaceful does not mean defenseless, and it never has." The assembly did not know how to respond, because she was right. Article 7 was clear, and the humans had not attacked anyone, and the Drexhari had started it, and the law was on humanity's side. In the back of the chamber, Archivist Zealot Vor stood up, chitin graying at the joints, his eyes harder than they had been 30 years ago when he had processed that first strange land sale. He walked to the tribunal's bench and placed a data tablet on the surface. His file, his evidence, everything he had gathered over 3 decades. "Reclassify them," he said, and his voice was shaking, not with fear, but with the frustration of a being who had been screaming into silence for a generation. "Reclassify them now, before it is too late." The tribunal looked at the file. Then they looked at each other. Then Rindal the Keeper, who had never been wrong, who had classified 900 species with perfect accuracy, spoke in a voice like crumbling stone. "The classification stands. The matter is tabled for further review." Zealot Vor closed his eyes, and somewhere on Haven 528, in the smoking ruins of the city that was already being rebuilt, a human soldier sat on a pile of rubble and ate a ration bar, looked up at the sky where the last Drexhari ships were disappearing into the void, asked the soldier beside her, "Do you think they will reclassify us now?" The first soldier chewed slowly, swallowed, and shook her head. "No," she said, "and that is exactly what the Admiral is counting on." 20 years after the 528 incident, the galaxy had split into 2 kinds of species, those who were afraid of humanity and those who loved them. The terrifying part was that the humans had planned for both. The Verath Pact formed in the 12th year after the battle, a coalition of 12 militant classified species who had looked at the wreckage of the Drexhari fleet and understood what the Concord's bureaucrats refused to accept, that humanity was not what it claimed to be, and that the longer the galaxy waited, the harder it would be to stop them. The pact was led by the Drexhari Dominion, rebuilt and hungry for revenge, and it included the Korvathi hegemony, the Sylph Collective, the iron worlds of Makara, and 8 other species, whose empires had been built on the simple principle that the strong take what they want. Together, they commanded more than 10,000 warships and controlled a quarter of the galaxy's resource-producing systems. Should have been terrifying. But they had a problem. Humanity was still classified as peaceful. Under Concord law, any unprovoked military action against a peaceful species triggered automatic sanctions, trade embargoes, territorial seizures, and in extreme cases, collective military response from the entire Concord. The Pact could not attack humanity without destroying themselves, and the classification that had been meant to limit humanity was now a shield that protected them from the very species that wanted them dead. It was the most elegant trap the galaxy had ever seen, and the humans had not even built it. They had simply walked into the one the Concord had built for them and turned it around. But the humans were not content to simply hide behind the law. In the years following the 528 incident, humanity launched what its internal strategists called the Doctrine of Kindness, and it was the most devastating weapon ever deployed without firing a single shot. It began with medicine. Human medical technology had advanced rapidly during their quiet decades of expansion, and they had developed treatments for diseases that had plagued other species for centuries. Genetic disorders, cellular degradation, neural decay, conditions that the Concord's medical establishment had declared untreatable. Humanity offered these treatments for free. Not to the powerful species, not to the wealthy empires, but to the small ones, the overlooked ones, the species that had been classified as peaceful or scavenger and forgotten by the Concord's hierarchy. The Volani, a fragile avian species dying of a genetic plague that had halved their population, received a human medical mission that cured the disease in 8 months. The Toru, a subterranean species whose homeworld had been strip-mined by a militant empire and abandoned, received human engineers who rebuilt their water systems and restored their food. Production. The Lasari, a nomadic species that had been denied territorial rights for 2,000 years, were offered settlement on a human terraformed world. Rent-free, no conditions, no strings attached. Except there were always strings. Not visible ones, not written in any contract, but strings made of gratitude and dependency, and the slow, quiet understanding that humanity was the only species in the galaxy that had ever helped without demanding something in return, or at least without demanding it openly. Within a decade, over 400 species had received some form of human aid, and those 400 species remembered who had helped them when no one else would. Human cultural exports continued to spread, deeper and wider than ever before. Human music played in alien cities. Human films were watched in alien homes. Human food was eaten at alien tables. And with every song, and every story, and every meal, the idea of humanity shifted from that strange, peaceful species to our friends. The Vereth Pact watched this happening and understood it for what it was, even if the rest of the galaxy did not. "They are buying allies," said war leader Kreth Voss, older now, his remaining eye burning with a cold hatred that had kept him alive for 20 years. "Every medical mission is a recruitment campaign. Every relief ship is a flag planted in someone else's loyalty." He was right, but being right did not help him, because the Pact's options were shrinking by the year. They tried the political route. The Pact spent 3 years building a coalition to bring a formal reclassification motion to the Concord Assembly, gathering evidence of human military capability, documenting the hidden shipyards, compiling testimony from Drexhari survivors of the 528 incident. The motion was presented with great ceremony and great confidence, and the evidence was overwhelming, and anyone with eyes could see that humanity was not what its classification said it was. The vote was called. The motion failed. It failed because 412 species voted against it, and every single one of those species had received human aid in the past decade, and they were not going to vote to reclassify the only species that had ever shown them kindness. The Drexhari ambassador slammed his fist into the voting console, hard enough to crack it. "You fools," he roared at the assembly. "You are voting to protect the thing that is going to devour you." Nobody listened. In the observation gallery above the chamber, archivist Zealot Vor sat in silence, watching the vote tallies scroll across the screen, and beside him sat a young Rinari aide who had read his book. The book that almost no one had read. "They won," the aide whispered. "The humans won without being in the room." Zealot Vor nodded slowly. "That is what makes them dangerous," he said, and his voice trailed off. Voice was tired and old. "The Drexhari conquer with warships. The Korvathi conquer with fear. The Sylph conquer with numbers. But the humans conquer with kindness. And kindness is the one weapon that no species has ever built a defense against." He paused and looked down at the assembly floor, where the human ambassador was shaking hands with delegates from a dozen grateful species. "They did not exploit a loophole in the system," he said, more to himself than to anyone else. "They are the loophole. They made the galaxy love them, and now the galaxy cannot let them go. And by the time anyone realizes what has happened, there will be nothing left to do but accept it." Paused. The aide stared at him. "So what do we do?" Zealot Vor did not answer for a long time. "We watch," he finally said, "and we write it down, so that whoever comes after us will know how it happened." That night, in a secure room deep inside a human station, Fleet Admiral Alara Mwangi reviewed the vote results with her senior staff. 412, said her chief of intelligence, a quiet man named Osei, who smiled even less than she did. "That is more than we projected." Mwangi nodded. "The doctrine is working faster than expected. The Pact will not try the political route again, which means they will eventually try the military route. And when they do, they will be the aggressors, and we will be the victims, and the entire galaxy will watch them prove everything we have been saying about them for decades." She stood and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. "Kindness is not weakness," she said quietly. "Kindness is the long game, and we have been playing it since the day we walked into that tribunal and let them call us peaceful." She turned back to her staff. "Now we wait for them to make the mistake we have been building toward for 90 years. And across the galaxy, in the war rooms of the Verath Pact, 12 species sharpened their weapons and told themselves that this time, they would not underestimate the humans. They were wrong. The Verath Pact attacked on a morning that had no name in human calendars, because it came to 12 worlds at once, and each world had its own morning, and its own sky, and its own way of burning. 10,000 warships from 12 species hit human space in a coordinated strike that was the largest military operation the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. And for exactly 6 hours, the Pact believed it was winning. They were not winning. They were walking into the last room of a trap that had taken 120 years to build. Fleet Admiral Alara Mwangi, now 146 years old, thanks to the life extension technology that human scientists had perfected in their quiet shipyard systems, received the attack reports from her command station aboard the flagship Prometheus. And she did not panic, and she did not shout, and she did not rush. She read each report carefully, nodded once, and then gave a single order that went out to every human fleet commander in every system under attack. Execute Contingency Autumn. Across human space, hidden shipyards opened their doors, and fleets that had never been seen by any alien sensor emerged from asteroid belts and gas giant atmospheres and hollowed-out moons where they had been waiting, some of them for decades. The Pact had sent 10,000 warships. Humanity answered with 14,000. The war lasted 14 months, and the history of the galaxy broke in half. The first phase was defense. Human fleets held their territory with a ferocity that the Pact had prepared for, because they had studied the 528 incident, and they knew that humans fought hard when cornered. What they had not prepared for was the second phase, because humans did not stay cornered. In the fourth month of the war, human fleets crossed the border into Pact territory for the first time, and they did not come as conquerors, liberators. The Drexhari Dominion had held 17 subject species in forced labor for centuries. Entire civilizations enslaved to feed the Dominion's war machine. Human forces struck the slave worlds first, breaking orbital defense platforms, disabling ground-based suppression systems, and landing troops that moved through the enslaved populations, not with weapons raised, but with hands open. "We are here to help," they said, in languages they had learned years ago, in preparation for a moment they had known was coming. "You are free." The Korvathi hegemony had maintained a network of prison colonies where political dissidents from a dozen species had been held for generations. Human special forces hit every prison simultaneously in an operation so precisely coordinated that the Korvathi High Command received 17 liberation confirmations before they even knew an attack had begun. The iron worlds of Makara had been strip mining 3 occupied homeworlds, destroying ecosystems and poisoning atmospheres to fuel their industrial base. Human environmental warfare teams, a military specialty that no other species had ever conceived of, deployed atmospheric restoration systems while combat engineers held the perimeter, rebuilding worlds while the battles still raged around them. The galaxy watched all of this on the extranet, because the humans made sure of it. Every liberation was filmed, every freed population was interviewed, every ruined world was documented before and after human intervention, and the narrative that emerged was devastating, not to humanity, but to the Pact. Because the story the galaxy saw was simple. 12 militant empires had attacked a peaceful species, and that peaceful species had responded by freeing everyone the militants had ever enslaved. It was the most effective propaganda campaign in the history of warfare, and every word of it was true. Began to fracture in the 8th month, when 3 of its smaller members, species that had joined out of fear rather than conviction, surrendered individually and requested human protection. By the 10th month, the Korvathi hegemony collapsed entirely, its government overthrown by its own population, who had watched human forces free their cousins on the prison worlds, and decided they wanted the same thing. By the 12th month, the Drexhari Dominion stood alone, and war leader Kreth Voss, the scarred old warrior who had started everything with his raid on Haven 528 decades ago, sat in his command bunker and stared at a map that showed human forces closing in from every direction. "They planned this," he said to no one, "from the very first day, from the moment they walked into that tribunal and smiled and let themselves be called peaceful. They planned all of this." He was right. In the 14th month, the Drexhari Dominion surrendered, was taken into custody by human forces who treated him with a respect and dignity that he did not understand and could not process. The war was over, but the reclassification was just beginning. The Tribunal of Assessment convened for the last time in a chamber that was packed beyond capacity, with delegations from every species in the Concord, watching from every gallery and every screen across the galaxy. Rindal the Keeper was there, ancient beyond measure now, his silicon body cracked and pitted with age, and he sat at the center of the bench with eyes that had finally begun to doubt. The tribunal asked the question that the galaxy needed answered, and they directed it at the woman who had started everything. Fleet Admiral Ilara Mwangi walked to the podium with the same steady stride she had used 120 years ago, and she looked up at the tribunal, and she was still smiling. "What are you?" Rindal asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. "What are you really?" Mwangi looked at him, and then she looked at the chamber, And then she looked at the cameras that were broadcasting her face to 4,000 worlds. "You built a system," she said. "A system that looks at a species and puts it in a box. Predator, militant, hive, peaceful. And you believed that a species could only be one thing, because every species you had ever met was only one thing." She paused. "Humans are not one thing." She let the silence hold for a moment, and then she continued. "We are the most peaceful species you have ever met. We write music that makes warriors weep. We build hospitals on worlds we have never visited. We feed the hungry and shelter the lost, and teach the young and hold the dying. And we mean it every time, with our whole hearts." Her voice did not rise, but it hardened. "And we are the most dangerous species you have ever met. We have fought each other for 100,000 years. And we have become very, very good at it. We invented the concept of total war. We split the atom to build a weapon. We walked on our own moon, not because it was easy, but because someone told us it was impossible." She leaned forward. "You asked what we are. We are the species that will give you everything we have and ask nothing in return, right up until the moment you threaten what we love. And then we are the species that will burn your empire to the ground and plant flowers in the ashes." She straightened. "Your system could not classify us, because your system assumes that kindness and violence are opposites. But in humans, they are the same thing. They are both expressions of how much we care." She straightened. "So classify us however you want. It will not matter. It never mattered, because we were never going to be what you told us we were. We were always going to be what we chose to be." The chamber was silent. Rindal the Keeper looked at the data tablet in front of him. 120 years of evidence that his system, his perfect system, had failed for the first and only time. He struck humanity's classification from the record. In its place, he created a new category. The first new category in 11,000 years of galactic civilization. Classification: adaptive subtype, uncontainable. And then, for the first time in his ancient life, Rindal the Keeper did something he had never done before. He was afraid. In a quiet room on Axiom Prime, far from the crowds and the cameras, archivist Zelith Vor sat at his desk and wrote the final line of the book he had spent a lifetime creating. The book that had once been ignored, but would now be required reading for every species in the Concord. He wrote slowly, carefully, choosing each word as though it were the last thing he would ever say. "If you ever meet a species that comes to you smiling, bearing gifts, asking for nothing but a little land and a fair trade, run. Do not walk, do not negotiate, do not classify them and file them away and assume you understand what they are. Just run." He set down his pen. "Because that is what the humans did. They came to us smiling, and we opened the door, and we gave them a seat at the table, and we thought we were being generous." He looked out the window at the stars. Stars that now belonged, in one way or another, to a species that the galaxy had once dismissed as harmless. "We gave them the galaxy with a handshake, and they said thank you, and they meant it. That is the worst part.